All right, we're here today with Tim Philpott, a finance and technology industry professional with around 40 years of finance and technology experience. Companies ranging from EY, Williams-Sonoma, Box, Gap, Old Navy. Tim, could you tell us more about your resume? Just give us a start from
Yeah,
university till today and what got you to your current position.
absolutely. Yeah. So I started my career as an accounting major, University of San Francisco. But it was interesting. I started in accounting, but I've always had a love of technology, which has really changed a lot. You can imagine with the 40-year time frame, technology used to mean big data centers and a lot of big enterprise systems and things like that. It's so different now. But started my career at EY. I was a financial auditor for 6 years. But I was also managing what at the time was called EDP audit, which just turns into essentially computer audit or doing financial audits with a focus on the technology side of the audit. So did a lot of audits of large banking concerns like Bank of America, for example, was one of my largest clients. Was auditing their large scale systems and their data centers for a lot of that time, as well as doing the financial audits with more traditional retail and finance type of customers on the audit side. Did that for 6 years. Left there as a manager and went to work for Gap. Actually went into Gap, went into finance there in more of an operational role, and spent about a year in operations, and then found my way into planning, which kind of launched my career in planning that's happened since that point. So majority of my career doing financial planning, budgeting, strategic planning, long range planning, etc. So about 6 years at the first 6 years at Gap, doing that corporately across a number of the kind of corporate functions from from finance to legal to data to the actual distribution centers, IT, security, a lot of those functions, more corporate kind of shared services type of organizations. And then the second half of my time, spent about a year in just straight up doing strategy work for a year, and then another 6 years after that, got promoted to director of financial planning for the IT organization. So that was really interesting. That was kind of a dream come true because I wanted to get really close to that organization. So I was reporting to a CIO for the first time in my career. And that was super interesting. Did everything there from doing financial planning for an IT organization, along with all the projects and the technical side of that, but got very involved with more the procurement and sourcing aspects of that business. So got very involved in learning about negotiations and contracts on both on commodities as well as software, and doing custom enterprise deals. And at the end of that 6 years, went hard towards that, focusing almost exclusively on that for the last year. Then left there, went to Williams-Sonoma, picked that up. So then I had both. I had then the financial planning for IT. So I was also reporting to the CIO at Williams-Sonoma, who was a former friend from Gap, and then stayed there for another 12 years. All that time in IT, but growing from just doing finance and starting a little bit of the sourcing, strategic sourcing aspects, growing that into a full practice, eventually doing all of the sourcing for IT, which at that point was about $100 billion function, or $1 billion function, I should say. And then the last couple of years in that role, got promoted to VP, and then spent time doing those two functions, as well as adding in, kind of going back to my early part of my career, more security compliance. So I went back to my roots as a CISA. So I'm a CPA and a CISA. The CISA focusing on all those controls around technology, and really helped build the security compliance function for Williams-Sonoma, which at that point was really almost solely focused on security, but not on compliance. So got very involved in a lot of that work, building out a whole function, working with senior management, helping them understand risk, define that, develop a program, focus on a lot of the general controls around development, around provisioning access for the company, elevated privileges. So back to a lot of the technology focused and working closely with security. So 12 years there, left there. And so my last 5 years, I'm coming up on 5 years, I finally left retail after, I guess, better part of 24 years in retail, and moved into a tech company, not reporting to a CIO, now reporting to a CFO, but still supporting a number of the organizations. So now I'm supporting essentially 6 C-level executives. I'm supporting CIO, CFO, Chief Accounting Officer, Chief Legal Counsel, Chief People Officer. Oh, sorry, one more. And then our Chief Security Officer, CSO. So a lot of cumulative experience over the course of my career, having touched many of those functions along the way. Now my role is helping them doing financial plans for a smaller company. And Boxes now it just reached the $2 billion sales point, just got profitable in the last year or so. One of the reasons why I got there was a lot of the things I'd learned along the way on the finance side, I was able to bring to a smaller, less mature company, helping them develop a lot of the practices and a lot of formal analysis and ways of looking at their business. For example, one of the things that I was able to build in my first year there was a capital planning process. They had no capital planning process, had no need for one in the early days of that business because they were getting cash from VCs. They were cash rich. They were trying to spend all the cash they could. Suddenly they were no longer VC funded. They went public. They had to actually find a way to become profitable. And one of the ways of doing that was employing capital investments. And the big part of my contribution to that was building out something called the investment committee, which essentially looks at all of the capital investments for all the corporate areas I support, as well as the go-to-market, sales, marketing, and other parts of the go-to-market business, looking at those investments, implementing a lot of the formal ROI practices and analysis that kind of come right out of the finance book that you would study in college, but putting it in front of a committee of our CIO, CFO, and COO, and helping them make good decisions about the investments for the company, and then managing the back end of that, all the financials around project tracking management, working with our CIO and our CISO. So lots going on there. It's been a really wild ride. This role has probably been the funnest of all of them. Although tech, you work a lot harder than you do in other industries. You run lean, but being able to take a lot of what I learned both in the early parts of my career and then the latter parts, and then bring them to a growing company that really had a lot of needs. I used to joke when I got there, I kind of had a playbook, if you will, of the things I'd learned in my career. I thought, well, they'll probably need some percentage of these. They needed everything. So, I was able to build out all the planning for the organization that I was talking about with those 6 C-levels, built out formal reporting, capital planning, a long range planning process that's carried us through that process. We're actually in the middle of doing our budget planning right now, getting ready for our big presentation here after the holidays, as well as all the other capital planning and other things like that kind of round out how we look at our business, and to employ a lot of the experiences I got in my years of Williams-Sonoma around outsourcing, analyzing labor costs, negotiating, and consolidating a lot of our actual labor spend. So a lot of those things that I've done over the years, I've been able to do also at Box. So I'll pause there.
That's a really impressive resume, and it sounds like you have this huge combination of both skill and talent in tech and in finance. Would it be fair to say that?
Interesting, because early on, I knew I wanted to be working in tech. I knew I was very interested in accounting. I actually studied accounting in high school, believe it or not. And so when I went to college, it was kind of a natural to go in that direction. I knew I wanted to become a CPA, but then I quickly realized I didn't want to be a partner in a CPA firm. It wasn't what I enjoyed. Right? I enjoyed the analysis. I didn't enjoy the client side as much. I mean, I serve clients today, but I didn't want to be selling services. I wanted to be helping leaders understand their operations, understand their finances, optimize and make good decisions around their business. So along the way, I've been able to do some really interesting work. I mentioned a lot of the negotiations and contracts. They've been able to negotiate multi-million dollar Microsoft deals, about 6 or 7 of them, some of which were pretty impactful. And you're able to take a lot of the things you learned around analysis, and I'd like to bring those into a very unstructured set of decisions and build out models, build out decision processes, working with folks that are all very involved in the process that have strong opinions, but don't know how to reflect those in a financial decision. So really mixing the blend of operational decision making and understanding what drives the business and drives operational success, but combining that with the financial decision as well, and trying to find that right balance between the two. So I always say you can do a great job of delivering the financial side, but if you can't deliver the operational side, then you're really not going to be successful. So today I spent a lot of time around working with Box on a lot of helping them build out these processes, but I also spend a lot of time with younger professionals who are coming up in their careers. I love to spend time teaching them what I've learned in my career, some of the approaches and philosophies. So that's actually been one of the funnest parts of this job, is really the mentoring and the coaching I've been able to do in my time in the last 5 years.
How many people report to you in your current position?
It's interesting. I've managed different size organizations. So I've managed everything from, organizations of about 20 that were when I was in Gap and Williams-Sonoma. Came to tech, and what you learn is you have to do a lot with a lot fewer people. So I got 5 people doing the work of 20 people. So you have to find a way to automate. You got to find a way to streamline your processes. You have to right size the workload, and then you have to very quickly scale up the capabilities of your team to be successful in this kind of environment.
So how much of your work have you been able to automate compared to doing
Yeah,
manually? And
a
how
great
does that
question.
compare to your early career?
Yeah, it's interesting. Early in my career, and I think a part of this is the change in the technology, right? So when I started my career, when I was doing EDP audits back in the day, you had to learn to write code. So I was learning to write a lot of report languages and things like that, a lot of audit languages. Didn't really enjoy that too much. Man, I took coding in school. I actually enjoyed coding in school, but that wasn't as much fun. But then desktop computing, you take this for granted, but PCs weren't that accessible back in the day. They started to become a lot more accessible. And so the combination of things like Excel spreadsheets and being able to automate those using VBA, and you could drive a lot of costs and a lot of efficiencies through the processes. What happened was in the we're obviously going through a bit of what I call a bit of a moment right now in the macro environment, but the last big one was back in the financial crisis back in 2007. And at that time, I actually lost half of my financial staff because we had to take a severe cut in our business because retail was so severely impacted by that. So I was faced with the challenge of how do I do the majority of what I'm doing with half the people that I previously had? And so you immediately turn to automation. How can we take everything that we're doing today, automate those activities, and still do them successfully? And so, very painful process to go through, but one that kind of brought me back to my roots of thinking more constructively about what is the essence of what we're doing, what are the things that are kind of the secret sauce in terms of analysis, and how much of this is actually, I affectionately call it the hunter-gatherer analyst problem of you spend 80% of your time trying to collect the data, trying to get it into a usable format before you can really do the analysis. So we try to solve for that piece. And so we're able to get maybe half of the work that was being done manually automated. So we went from it would take you a week to prepare a report, and then you have minimal time to analyze it and get it in front of senior management, to you could push a button and produce that report in 15 minutes, or some cases even faster. And then you could take that entire half of the time you had available before, but like you could still take a significant amount of time and use that for analysis. And so that was really kind of like a game changer. So when I came to Box and I saw the setup I was going to have there was essentially what I inherited. Box was a new function. There was no existing financial processes. All of those C-level executives were not getting financial reports. They were not actively managing their financials. We weren't hitting our forecasts. Not surprising because people didn't know what they were spending. They didn't get extra reporting. So my first few months there really focused on how do we stand up reporting so they get regular monthly reports. They get in depth, not just high level spending, but down to the level detailed vendor level spending that really aligns well with how they think operationally about their businesses. So we stood all that up in the first several months, created a cadence of monthly feedback and engaging them in a monthly forecast process, which wasn't really the practice in our business at the time. The other parts of the group that I'm in right now is called strategic planning and analysis. The other parts of that team were doing much infrequent, more ad hoc type of analysis. And what I implemented was more classic kind of structure around here's a financial process that we'll manage all through every single month. We'll build it out each year in the budget process, and then we'll kind of reset it every quarter. But we're doing a forecast every single month. We're looking at the performance of the teams in terms of their forecast accuracy, which closely aligns with how we're held accountable to the street. For we give guidance to the street. If you make or beat your guidance, the street will oftentimes reward you generally. And what I want is my financial executives to be aligned with that same cadence and that same mindset. So they weren't making operational and financial decisions that ran counter to the targets and the commitments that we were making publicly. So a big part of this is, and it's not even like it sounds really like that's really cool. Like it's like the basic blocking and tackling. Are we doing a good job with understanding what we're spending? So that's part of giving them visibility to that reporting. Do we know historically what we spent in certain categories? Are we making good decisions about what we can spend in a particular period? Are we following disciplined PO and planning processes on a monthly basis so we have visibility? We have the ability to see kind of the full closed loop of spending and get a monthly feedback on that. So when we don't do a good job on our forecast accuracy, we can understand the things that they could do better. We can make those much more repeatable and understandable. And so, it was interesting when I presented this when I first came, because it was a much different approach. It may be a little bit more investment required, definitely on the reporting side. But what it's instilled is a sense of ownership and understanding at our executive levels. And then what we're able to do is then spend our time helping them analyze their results, helping them to understand the things they can change to do a better job. And then when business has twists and turns like we're in currently, and we have to make adjustments, we have confidence that we understand what adjustments we can make to our spending. We have confidence that our leaders are going to understand why we're trying to do these things. And now we have partners that are, helping us try to get to our numbers. So we've had to make quite a few adjustments every quarter in this past year, given the macro. We're going through probably the tightest budget season we've had this year. But all of our leaders are aligned, and everyone is understanding the objectives. We've done a lot of expectation setting, helping them understand how the external numbers work, how their numbers connect to those, working with the next level of their leaders and their leadership teams to understand how they can do a better job in their businesses. And we're doing this with, a handful of people that are probably, let's say, 4 to 5 years out of school, who are now managing C-level executive relationships, which is not normal and not like the norm. It's something we've really had to invest in and help people to get prepared for. So they're managing. It's quite a step, and not everybody is prepared for it. So we do look for folks that have a very strong balance of financial understanding, but equally important, a good amount of communication experience, as well as the ability to manage relationships. And the last part, I think, is the one that's a little more difficult, and you don't get from everybody that's at a few years out of school, right? You have to have a certain level of confidence. You have to be curious, intellectually curious. You have to be comfortable talking to, in this case, VPs or SVPs, C-levels, and asking them questions about the business and being confident that, they'll listen to you and that they'll engage with you. And you have to be also willing to bring, modeling and other types of tools to them to show that you can add value to what they're doing. So we've kind of dusted off a lot of the tools that I've used over my career. We've adapted them to a lot of those situations. Recent example, we were working on real estate's a hot issue right now, as you can imagine. After COVID, a lot of businesses have way too much real estate. A lot of our workers are working in a hybrid setting rather than full-time in offices. So we're asking ourselves, how do we do a good job to manage real estate? A lot of companies, I think you may have seen it recently. A lot of companies are actually shedding and taking an annual charge against their financials to write off a lot of their commitments. Dropbox has just went through this recently, and we're negotiating to essentially terminate some of our leases. That requires us to do a lot of cash flow analysis as well as P&L analysis. Sitting down with real estate people and accounting people to try to help, and legal people to try to understand how do we want to execute something like this, and then running models that give feedback in that process so they understand kind of the twists and terms. What are the limits of what we can accept in terms of termination fees and things like that, as well as what are the implications of getting out of the long-term commitments for rent and for other occupancy costs and things like that. And that oftentimes crosses paths. We talk about finance, but finance and accounting are very closely linked, right? Which is one of the things I enjoy because I have obviously an accounting background. The ability to sit down with the technical accounting partners and listen carefully to what they're telling you about how the accounting guides some of these decisions. So I mentioned do financial modeling. You do obviously going to do discounted cash flow because you're going to be looking at different cash streams, both positive, negative over time, discounting those back. That's one important view. But the other important view is the accounting view, the P&L view, because you take the example of lease accounting. Depending on how the lease is structured, and if you have free rent periods, you could have essentially expense more of a lease than you're actually paying out in cash. You terminate the lease, and then suddenly you actually get some of that back as a gain. Like there's all kinds of little nuances between the accounting, between the finances, and the operational side. So that's kind of been the nexus in my career is trying to understand how all these different teams think about things, understand how they tie into decision making, and then doing the basic blocking and tackling, as I've said, but then being ready and prepared when the opportunity to do decision analysis and bringing structure to decisions, which in my mind is the funnest part of the job. So you get to peel off from the stuff you do every month and actually start with a blank spreadsheet and build something, which I think is a heck of a lot of fun.
Absolutely. There's something you said that really caught my attention that I want to get your opinion on. You mentioned you're looking for, or the company as a whole is looking for candidates with 4 to 6 years of experience that demonstrate financial understanding.
Yeah.
Where do you draw that line of someone that does not have a lot of experience, but that does have a strong financial understanding? Let's say
Yeah,
yourself,
sure.
you have a degree, now you had EY under your belt. At that point, would you say you're a candidate that has strong financial understanding
Yeah,
or not
it's so
quite yet?
interesting, and I know when you look at, what is the curriculum and this is interesting because I remember with my son he was looking at a finance major when he was in school. And what struck me about, the classic finance major is really more about investment banking, right? Kind of like the classic accounting is more about public accounting and auditing. But there is really
Right.
the space I'm in around financial planning. There isn't really it's the closest thing to that would be like a management accounting class or something like that. There isn't really the perfect blend of experiences or a blend of actual classwork that gets you there. So when I look at what I'm doing, some people come out of accounting. Like when I was working at Gap, everyone they hired was someone who came out of was a fifth year auditor coming out of had an accounting background. They like to have financially oriented accounting people. They turn into planning people. I've been other places where they really, really like more strategic focused folks that are maybe MBAs or come out of investment banking. Again, still very financial, maybe in a slightly different way, but very analytical, are very, very, very comfortable with the financial tools. In my case, I had to learn all the finance work. I literally had to crack open my finance book and go back and relearn a lot of the things that I learned in my single finance class. But what you really, if you start to understand, are what are the things that are really applicable to my business, and you can go back and pinpoint those things and learn them. So in my case, all of the work that I'm doing today around investment committee is not something I learned in school. It's something I learned by working with the business, by literally sitting down and listening to classes taught by an NYU professor that I thought that taught finance theory really well. I remember when I had to calculate my first weighted average cost of capital. I mean, I had to understand kind of the recipe. How do you calc that? I'd never heard of that before, and now I
Yeah, that's
have
freshman
time,
year stuff now.
right? And that's important. But like if you don't ever dust it off and use it, same thing with just discounted cash flow, net present value, all the different types of ROI calculations, IRR, payback period, all those things that are there's so many things they show you in school, some of which, depending on direction you go, you're going to need all of them. But like in my field, that's probably the most difficult math you're going to do. In the classic planning sense, you're mostly just calculating percentages and growth percentages, and like it's not
Yeah, I'd have to
it's not
second that.
calculus or anything like that, right? It's
Right.
more knowing how to think about and how to shape decisions, and how to integrate a lot of different types of information. So when I go back to my Microsoft deals that I did, whether that was a Microsoft deal or an Oracle deal or any of the other did hundreds of deals. But what you really had to ask yourself is, what does the business need, right? Now I went back to which products are we using? What's the licensing mechanism that the company brings that you have to understand and you have to solve for? So you're building that out. How do you align that with the pricing that you're getting from the vendors? You've got all those pieces, and then ultimately, where do we get value from it? What do we think our utilization is going to be in the short term and the long term, over say a 3-year horizon? Let's map that out. Let's decide where we're going to get value. And then what you're really doing is then you're then playing around doing sensitivity analysis between all the different options, thinking about the different variables, and playing around with the range of those different variables to see what makes sense. Then you get in the room and negotiate. Now you have a model. You can turn the knobs and pull the levers and get the kind of answers you need, and react to the real-time feedback you're getting from the vendors as well as from your partners. So a lot of it's almost like my hobby when I was growing up was cars. I was a car guy that worked on cars. So I was think of systems and how things are interrelated. But ultimately, we're giving our executives, a dashboard. We're giving them a set of gauges they can use to manage their business or make decisions on in a particular decision process that they're facing. And
Now,
most of them
what
don't spend their time
skills?
with these things, right? They have good instincts, but they have blind spots, and you're really trying to show them where their blind spots are.
So those people that someone like a college student would want to work under and be able to present an analysis for, what skills and qualifications are they looking for in a candidate?
Sure. I think the first one is it's having a financial orientation. There is a certain bar. If you can't, and again, I would say you might not come at it from finance. You might come at it from accounting. Ironically, that recently I've hired a bunch of folks that had tax backgrounds. Like, well, what does tax have to do with finance? They're not intimidated by numbers. They're used to having client-facing interactions. They're able to build those and build trust relationships. Once you do that, you can then get closer to clients and get better information. You can bounce things off people. Like, that's the kind of having that kind of interplay, having that confidence when you're working with people. You get the same thing with auditors. First thing you learn as an auditor when you show up in the engagement is no one's going to help you. You have to find a way to get information. You have to be able to not just ask the first question because you're going to get a bogus answer. You have to ask the second and third questions, and you have to really think analytically about what you're looking at. So those are just two examples. You could also come out of consulting. A lot of people come out of different parts of consulting. Some of it being financial processes. You may come out of it from understanding the system side or the process side. That's very valuable too. So it's hard to say the right place, but I still think it comes back to it's finance, it's relationships, it's communication, right? Those are the things that drive this. And even within our strategic finance team that I'm part of, the broader team, part of a group of 25. Not everybody in those teams possess those things in the same degree, right? So there's folks in the team that are very good with big data, that are great with big data sets, being able to just do a huge amount of analysis with the right tools to do that analysis. But some of them wouldn't be that successful working with a C-level executive. They have very little interaction. They're really with the numbers, and they're kind of off in their corner. They're doing deep analysis, right? They may never be the perfect person for that type of a relationship. They may have to really work to develop that skill set, but they're still successful in the broader organization.
Yeah. On that note, if you were in front of a finance class right now, just keeping it vague on the note of finance,
Yep.
what would you tell the students? They're in their senior year, they have had no luck looking for a job, and they're just stuck. What could they do right now to better enhance their odds of getting a good job in the finance field? Keeping it vague, could be consulting, finance, investment banking, or head of strategy. What would you tell them to set themselves up for success?
Good question. I mean, I guess first of all, I wouldn't be too worried about where you start. It's not the type of company. To take my example, right? I started in public accounting. I served a lot of different types of clients and industries. I learned something from every one of them. So start somewhere. Like, find a place where you're going to learn. I'd say the earliest part of your career, why a lot of people go into investment banking, public accounting, consulting is because it's a very structured discipline. You're going to learn a methodology and approach. You're going to get a lot of training earlier in your career. So I think personally, myself, you're going to work really hard. Don't miss that. I think that's a great place to start because one, you're gonna get a level of competency that you can take wherever you go, right? And you're also going to get some set of credentials, something you're going to be able to say, this demonstrates that I can do these things, right? I think that's valuable. That said, some folks that go into corporate accounting or corporate finance right out of school, and that's fine. It's harder to land those entry-level jobs right out of school, I think, because most companies, unless they have a very large, like a Chevron would be an example, they'll hire a lot more entry level into those. But most smaller companies don't have the size of staff, and they don't have the programs to develop people. So they're looking for
Mhm.
those 4 to 6 year people, as you said earlier.
You mentioned Chevron does take on more
Chevron
people?
and those types of bigger companies. I just throw that out there because I know someone who
That's
went through
new.
a program. They oftentimes have larger programs where they bring in, I mean, and not just, I'm just talking about bigger companies. Oracle
Mhm.
is another great one that has great rotational programs. They're going to develop you. They're not good. You're not going to get like pigeonholed in a small function and not grow. I think that's the hardest thing is early in your career. And again, it goes back to what do you want? Like for me, like I didn't want to be a partner, like I said, in a public accounting firm, but I wanted to be part. My definition of what and this is important. Like, who do you want to be, right? For me, I wanted to be part of a forward-looking business. I didn't want it. I got tired of the looking at the accounting. It was kind of looking in the rearview mirror. I want to be part of shaping decisions. I want to be part of an industry that I ultimately that I was excited about. So tech became that for me. I really enjoyed retail as well because I could really identify and touch the product, and I could go into a store and see it, that type of thing.
Mhm.
Um, but identify what you enjoy. Some people really enjoy the theoretical finance part of it. That was never my thing. And I had opportunities to go in that direction. It just wasn't. So I was working with Bank of America a lot, and they obviously have I had a lot of customers there that were eager to let me kind of cut my teeth in that space. It just wasn't something I was excited about. So I'd say do something to get some good experience, and then look around, see what you really enjoy doing and go in that direction. There's so many different directions you can go. It's a tough time right now, obviously, because business is tough, and companies are not hiring as aggressively, but they're still hiring more than in any downturn I've ever seen. It's definitely a different time. There's still a lot of demand. So I don't know is that kind of what you're looking for, or are you looking for something
That's
else?
reassuring. Yeah. So identify your passion, look for a company that'll pour into you,
Yep.
and keep climbing in what you want to do and what you're good at.
Yep. And work hard. I
Yeah.
mean, I guess what did I learn in my first few years in public accounting is if you work hard, you're going to learn.
Hmm.
You building relationship is working hard too. Like it isn't just about showing up and, some people are very, very gregarious, easy to get to know, and like, but you're always going to you're dealing with so many different types of people. You're dealing with corporate controllers that don't even like people. Like they just want you to go away if you're not, or like you have to find ways to connect with people. And that
Right.
oftentimes isn't just on the job. It's also just personally being personable, talking about things you're interested, looking for things that they're interested in. A lot of it is people stuff, right?
Gotcha. Okay, let's talk crypto now. And this is
Yeah.
going to be two-faced. I want to hear your personal feelings and your opinion and knowledge on crypto, and then the businesses that you've worked for. If you can share how those businesses have been responding to the crypto buzz lately. So, what do you think or know about Bitcoin, Ethereum,
I,
Ripple,
I'm I'm no I'm no
online banking?
expert in the space. In fact, that my eldest son is probably is twice knows twice as much about it, and I haven't invested again. And I think some of this is it could be so much generational. To be honest with you, I mean, the new trends are always really interesting, and it's when you're early in your career, it's easier to jump in to a crypto business and kind of go with it and see where that goes. It's harder to do that later on in your career. For me, crypto, I guess I'm again going back to my focus as a car guy, if you believe it or not. I just want to know how things work, and I've honestly never gotten comfortable with exactly what crypto is selling me.
Okay.
I kind of feel like it doesn't feel like there's a there. Now I know it's been very successful, and I have friends that have made a lot of money in crypto. I have family members that are working in the crypto business. So I know there's a there. I just don't. I feel like it's a little bit more of a speculative business than what I'm something that I would invest in. And if I wouldn't
Mhm.
invest in it, why would I necessarily build my career on it? So for me, it's and this goes back to like I said early on. Why did what businesses did I want to be involved in? For me, if I didn't understand the business, then I probably didn't want to be part of making my career there. So I decided that banking, for example, wasn't the thing. Not that I was around banking for 6 years, um, but there were some a lot of products I didn't understand very well, and I just had a hard time relating to them. Whereas I walked into a retail store and I immediately understood what was that was all about.
Right,
Was able to
exactly.
get on the back end and understand, okay, how does the cost? I mean, I started in cost accounting, product accounting, and how essentially a Gap back in the day. How do they build jeans? How was
Mm,
the piecework? How does it move between factories? How does landed cost end up being built from all the different components and piecework? And I can understand that. And then it was easier to understand how to optimize that and how to apply activity-based costing and other approaches to it that would make it more efficient. So for me, I have to have the mental picture before I feel comfortable. I guess I'm conceptual, but I'm not, but crypto is I've never gotten a comfort level with that particular business model.
gotcha. So your conclusion for it is that it's still speculative.
For me, it's not something that I would invest in. I have thought about it, and I guess for me it would be um, maybe just blind investing. It's not something that I understand. That
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of market dynamics at work there, but it doesn't feel like the underlying product. That's probably unfair. I mean, crypto is such a broad category, right? There's
Hmm.
there's Bitcoin, but there's lots of other things and blockchain. There's all kinds of other things that work there that are all kind of thrown together. Probably some of those other ones would be more interesting to me than just the trading side of it.
Okay. How about in the executive conversations? Have these topics been brought up?
Yeah, I don't hear it a lot. I mean, right now the buzz is all AI in our business, and I'm
Right.
sure all over the place. If you've been watching the news the last 48 hours or so, watching what's going on with ChatGPT is amazing,
Hmm.
and a little terrifying at the same time, given the subject
Oh
matter.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's more interesting to me because that's a model that I can understand. I understand how it supercharges our business and other businesses. I can actually touch it and use it. I guess it comes back to what I was talking about earlier, which is how do you take a lot of the how do you automate? How do you jumpstart what you're doing and move it ahead, with a lot more efficiency? And clearly there's
Right.
huge opportunities in that space to do that. And we haven't, like, my team hasn't even scratched the surface. I'm still kind of wrapping my brain around it. And our product, we're monetizing our product right now around AI, and we've built AI into the actual box, um, you know, uh, cloud product. So, but it's still emerging, but you can see, I can imagine the use cases already and how I would use it. I just haven't had the time to, employ them yet. But I think that's, from my perspective, that's probably a lot more intriguing than the crypto angle. I'm sure they'll both be equally lucrative in the long run. I guess the one thing I learned early in my career, when I was my last few years at Gap before I left there, was kind of at the end of the dot-com boom. And what you really saw was a lot of really interesting innovation, a lot of companies that went belly up, but proved a lot of really important concepts, some of which I invested in, lost money on. But then
Mhm.
you see those concepts come back and get successfully implemented, because a
Right.
lot of companies had to make a lot of mistakes and learn a lot of things with other people's money before, they would actually be operationally viable. So it's just a really interesting time for businesses with AI. I think there's a lot of parallels. As I would say, as I think in my career, you kind of get the aha moments where you think back to, hey, I see this a lot in technology. Like when cloud computing came around, for example, I kind of chuckled because when I started when I started working with IT back in the day, most companies didn't have their own data centers. They just did work in service centers. So there's
Mhm.
nothing new under the sun. There's just old concepts that are being reconstituted and refreshed. And I think that's one of the most interesting parts of that you see at this point in your career is you start to connect the dots, and you start to get the feeling that there's a lot of things that are familiar about the new things that you can kind of see. And also say, like, even going through the business downturn, you go back to, okay, what did I learn in the last three business downturns? And I can share with my team, like, how to think about this, how to think about
Mhm.
their own careers in a downturn. What are the things they should be focused on? One of the things that struck me very early on in tech in particular was just how impatient um, uh, people were. They wanted to come in, spend a year and a half in a role, and get promoted and move on. Like, if anything,
Oh
I've learned
yeah.
in my career is, if you don't spend 3 to 5 years in a function, maybe not the same exact role, but in a function, you're never going to understand everything that's happening. You're probably not going to
Mm.
make the impact that you could make, because for me, it took me 2 years to really fully understand it. Another year to kind of test out my theories and model a bunch of stuff. And then over the course of the next 4 to 5 years, year 4 and 5, I made the most impact. So having stayed, I've never stayed less than 6 years in a company or in a role.
Mm.
So I talked about, public accounting. I was there 6 years. I lived my life in
Mhm.
6 year increments. Spent 6 years, my first half of Gap in corporate finance, second half in IT, and then I did something similar in Williams-Sonoma. So I'm coming up to year 5 at Box. I guess we'll be reassessing next year where we go from here. Um, and
Okay.
to some degree, is coming to the end of the road. That's always an interesting part of the journey as well.
Let's talk about that. It's my last question is let's talk
Yeah.
about those increments.
Uh-huh.
Everyone wants to know what is the salary progression like without going into your
It's not linear.
personal numbers. But okay, that's interesting. But starting
Yeah.
at EY and just knowing how it went up from there, and what was the compensation like? Was it mostly salary? Did you get significant bonuses? Was there end of
Yeah, it
quarter
hasn't changed
bonuses?
much. I've watched one of my eldest son work for EY as well, years after me. Um, their model is the same always, which is they bring you in at high end of market, knowing that if they hire you a year in advance, they know by the time you get hired, you'll be in the middle of the market, which is what they do. They promote.
Mhm.
If you're producing at an average rate, they will promote you regularly almost every year, and you'll get regular market level type of promotions or financial increases. Um, they're not about profit sharing or anything like that. You're not going to get stock because it's partnership. So that's more about a salary type of situation, right? When you get out of there and you get into private businesses, that's where, once you get, depending on the business, if the business is doing well, sometimes when I was at Gap, they were giving stock to people, a year out of school. It wasn't a lot, but you still got some. So everybody had some skin in the game in terms of incentive to help the business grow. The bonuses typically came out closer to the manager director level. That's the case director level at my company today. And you have maybe 25% of your compensation is tied to the business performance. In the functions that I work with, it's less specific to very specific business outcomes other than the overall growth in sales and growth in operating margin and our ability to hit certain metrics like Rule of 40 and other types of cloud type of metrics, which are really helpful, especially in the marketplace where cloud companies aren't always profitable right away, but they oftentimes are driving free cash flow. So you have those types of things at play. But as I said, it's not linear. So in a business that is growing quickly, you might have very steep growth in your compensation. If you're moving laterally, you may not see that growth, but you may be growing in terms of knowledge and potential. So you might just be getting an annual review, but you may not, or annual merit, but you may not be actually growing through promotions and things like that. So it kind of goes in steps, right? You might get a 10% raise if you get a promotion or something like that. But if you're in public accounting, you might get something kind of in the 6-7% anyway, because they're closer to market. So they're all different models, and I guess I go back to the same thing is look at your compensation not just in terms of your financials. Look at it in terms of your total experience. Am I getting the experience I need to move forward in my career? Is it contributing to the next step? Right? Sometimes it's not about what you're getting paid; it's the potential you're building, and then when you make that next move, you're really cashing in big time because you're prepared for that move. So think of education and experience on the same level that you would compensation. And if you're not getting those things, then you probably need to be getting highly compensated because you're probably going to be stuck there for a while.
Gotcha. I hear that's usually the case with high-level consulting, where you stop getting experience, but you're well paid, but you just
Yeah.
plateau.
And that's oftentimes the trade-off there is lifestyle. I mean, you're going to work. I mean, it's better now. I mean, back in the day, even public accounting, you would, my first week on the job, I was in a group of 20. We walked in at the end of the first day, they asked half of the room to stand up and they shipped them to another part of the country. I didn't see them for 6 months. Like it just,
Wow.
it's having that kind of mobility, and it's not that bad anymore. My son Luke, as you know, is in consulting. They're still working hard, but they're not traveling all over the country for long periods of time. They're taking certain client visits and things like that. So I think it's actually a lot more tenable over a let's say 5 to 6 year time frame, whereas a lot of people were out of consulting within a year or two because they just didn't like the lifestyle, always on the road, living out of a suitcase, eating hotel food.
After college, especially, it sounds like a
Yeah,
great plan.
it's great traveling on someone else's dime.
Oh yeah, well, you've shared a lot of information with us. Really gave a lot of direction towards both finance and technology space. Shared some great experiences and gave a lot of direction.
Yeah.
Really, thank you, Tim. Best
Oh,
of
my
luck in
pleasure.
your 5-6 year mark. And you send you a LinkedIn request.
There you
Let's
go.
keep in touch.
Sounds good. Great talking to you, Joseph, and good luck to you.
Appreciate it, Tim. Have a great weekend.
Happy holidays. See you.
You too.
Bye bye.